So as you just heard, there's a recording in progress. We are recording the event tonight to be able to have it available through our website. So just keep that in mind. With your video, if you want it on or off, you're more than welcome to. As we go throughout this evening, the Baked Bean Supper is meant to be a very community-driven, conversational, informal, fun event where we are able to laugh together and share stories and be able to chat and talk about and feel inspired by history. So if at any time the mood takes you, feel free, please, to make a comment in the chat, comment to someone else's comment in the chat, get a thread going and start the conversation. If you would prefer to speak up, you are welcome to, there's a little feature where you can raise your hand so we can know, and it'll tag you so we can unmute you and be able to share that way as well. But if not everyone knows, that seems crazy, but maybe you don't know that I'm Raney Bench, the Executive Director for the MDI Historical Society. And I'm really excited to welcome everyone here to our 12th annual Baked Bean Supper. There's been some questions about how one has a baked bean supper online. And I would say that you're hearing some of those comments now where we've been encouraging people to bake their own beans and use the recipes that we've shared or recipes from your family and just come together to be part of storytelling and camaraderie and community and conversation. That really was the goal in developing the Baked Bean Supper, which was hosted at the high school for a number of years before we had to go virtual in 2021. And then last year again in 2022, we were hoping was going to be the last year we were virtual, in an effort to try to really foster a sense of kind of continuing a connection with this program and its purpose. In 2021, we created the Baked Bean Cookbook. So our tried and true and dedicated bean bakers who always contribute baked beans to the event gave us their recipes and their family histories and their tips and their stories, not just for beans, but for cookies and pies, mustard pickles, and brown bread. And so we compiled that into a virtual cookbook that we can deliver to your email box. If you haven't received one in the past, we can happily email that out to you. So if you want to branch out and try some new recipes, we would encourage you to check out the Baked Bean Cookbook. And we also really were focused around bringing everybody together to tell stories. The winter is certainly a time when we like to tell stories and reflect, and we think about our history, and we connect in that sense of identity and commonality that create this sort of collective memory, which really lends to strong community bonds together with one another. And that is something we can even do together online, thankfully. So while I wish we had been able to be together in person this year, I'm grateful for the technology to enable us to be together virtually. We had thought we were going to try to pull it together in person, and then the outbreaks that took place in December made us try to come online again. But I am just super excited. We heard before this event, we have people doing progressive dinners. So they're working together to make every element of a bean supper and go to each other's houses to share a meal as they watch the presentation tonight. And we know we've got some other people out there celebrating their annual bean supper. The last thing I'll say before we start the program is that the Baked Bean Supper is usually a fundraiser for the MDI Historical Society. And so if you feel inclined to make a donation on behalf of the MDI Historical Society, it will enable us to continue to provide these kinds of free programs. And we're deeply grateful for your support. You can do that on our website, click donate now and make a contribution. And we're really thankful for anything that you might feel inspired to give. Our program this evening is going to be fun. We're going to kick it off with a little bit of a game and some history trivia to get us all warmed up and our juices flowing and our conversation started. And I'm super excited to introduce our new Assistant Director, Lisa Murray. She's joining us from the Bass Harbor Library, and she started here in November. By expanding our staff a little bit, Lisa's going to be this really incredible complement to Jenna Jandrew, who is our online communications and community engagement specialist, who does all sorts of online programming from Chibako chats to book clubs to all of our newsletters. But now with Lisa here, we can expand our in-person programming here on the island even more. And so we're really excited. We're making some great plans for 2023. And Lisa's going to preview a little bit for you right now. So I'm going to toss it over to her.
Thank you, Rainey. And I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Hi, it's really great to be here and to meet all of you virtually. I'm sure I'll meet you more this summer. But I'm really excited to share this sneak peek of not only History Happy Hour, which is our members only experiential game fun experience that we have in local bars and restaurants, but it's also a sneak peek at our upcoming 2023 maritime themed Chibako, which will be out in May. And the 2023 season of History Happy Hour will have a theme of our previous editions of Chibako. So if you don't have them all lined up on your shelf, you can go to the website and you can read all of them for free. If you are not a member, please join and meet us. We'll be kicking off on March 22nd at Peter Trout's in Manset. So feel free to join if you haven't and be part of this. But tonight we have a preview of what History Happy Hour is all about. Tonight we're going to play Two Truths and a Lie. And I'll be challenging you to find the untruth among the facts based on articles from the 2023 Maritime edition of Chibako. I will show you 5 slides, and there will be 3 questions on each slide. You'll have 30 seconds to choose the statement that is a lie. We'll set up a little poll. You can click the answer you think is the lie, and then I'll explain the answers afterwards. So good luck, and I'm excited for the sneak peek. So here we go. Oh, hold on. Here we go. Oh, don't look. Okay. So the first question is from Natalie Springle's The Pogies Are Back article. And the first statement is modern uses for pogie oil include rheumatoid arthritis medicines and burn treatments. The second statement, in 1876, when Maine's pogie fishing industry became a booming business, it came to be organized and represented by the state's Oil and Guano Association. And the third statement to consider, in a common Thanksgiving story, the Wampanoag people taught pilgrims to plant fish, most likely pogies, along with their corn. So consider which one you think might be false and choose on the poll which one you think is fake. We had a lot of fun writing these, by the way.
Got 10 seconds left to answer your poll. 5 seconds. If you haven't gotten your answer, click one of those. We're going to close the poll. All right, poll is ended.
Okay. And number 1 is false. In modern times, people are still using pogie oil, but it's mostly used in industrial lubricants, cosmetics, and nutritional supplements. Number 2 and 3 are true. Thank you. My husband's giving me dinner. Thank you very much. Number 2, the fishing industry was organized by the Oil and Guano Association, but in addition, it was also one of the first fisheries managed by the U.S. Fisheries Commission. And while there is no record of the type of fish that the Wampanoag people taught the pilgrims to plant with their corn, it was most likely a pogie. because the Abenaki word for fertilizer is pauhagan. And it was such a common fish that is almost certainly the pogie. And here's how we did. Who got the... Oh, 35% got it. Okay. Question number 2. Question number 2 comes from Raney's article, Frenchman Bay, A Love Story, an Oral History with Eddie Monet and Edna Martin. The first statement to consider is Eddie Diver Ed Monet built an underwater snorkeling nature trail as a college project. The second statement, it is estimated that Diver Ed has been on over 47,000 separate dives in Frenchman Bay, compiling one of the most complete film records of the seafloor in this region. And the third statement is, in the 30 years they have been diving in Frenchman Bay, the only species Eddie and Edna have seen in sharp decline are the blood star sea stars and the crumb of bread sponges. So 30 seconds to guess which is false.
Ten seconds left to register your answers.
Okay, are we all set?
Yep.
Like everybody's in? Number 3 was false. As you can imagine, since 2000, Ed and Edna have seen a huge decline in sea life in Frenchman Bay. Compared to what it looked like 30 years ago, in the article, they say that it looks like a desert now. And they say that roughly 3/4 of the species are gone. They include sponges, sea stars, sea peaches, ridged whelks, cod, pollock, dogfish, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been a lot that has disappeared. Number 1, he did indeed build an underwater snorkeling nature trail along the shore of COA, and I wonder if it's still there. It was a long time ago, but it might be. And as you can imagine, Diver Ed has been on well over 47,000 dives, separate dives. He said in the article that he dives about 250 days a year, sometimes 2 times a day, sometimes 7 times a day. So that between his work with the dive-in theater and scallop diving, that adds up to a lot of dives. Yep. Very good on that one. It's not good what's going on there, but you got it. Okay, our third question is from Jenna Jondrew of the Historical Society. And from her article, Always Ready No Matter What, the establishment of the local Coast Guard. The first question to decide if it's, the first statement to decide if it's true or false is 2 brothers on Little Cranberry Island donated land for a life-saving station established in the 1870s. One brother, Gilbert Hadlock, served as the station's first keeper. The second question, from its inception in 1915 until World War II, married men were not allowed to enlist in the U.S. Coast Guard. And the third statement to consider, In the 1930s, the Baker Island lighthouse keeper's pregnant wife went into labor, and the local Coast Guardsmen arrived by lifeboat to transport her to a doctor on MDI, delivering a baby girl out to sea. So Rainey will pull up the poll and you decide which is false.
Ten more seconds to answer and figure out which one you think is the false statement. We get some late arrivals in there. Awesome. All right.
Okay. And the answer was number 2. There were no laws governing military marriage, and married men were able to serve alongside single men. Gilbert Hadlock not only donated the land for the life-saving station, but at 40 years old, he was one of the builders of it, and he was its first keeper. And in November of 1932, Annie Muse, the lighthouse keeper's wife, did indeed go into labor and gave birth to a daughter in a boat right next to Sutton Island. And the baby's name was Prudence Muse. So that is true.
All right, we have some good historians in the group.
Yeah. Okay. And question 4 is from Libby McDonald Bischoff's article, Lucy's Lens, Life on Mount Desert Rock, 1906 to 1909. Let's see if we can find the false one here. The daily lives of lighthouse keepers fascinated the public in the 1920s. Wives of keepers often provided articles, homemaking, and frugal living tips to magazines such as Harper's Bazaar and Good Housekeeping. The second statement, by the mid-1880s, Mount Desert Rock had become a well-known tourist attraction and yachting destination. And the third statement, the light keepers and their families ate well on Mount Desert Rock in the early 1900s and had ample supplies of fresh and preserved food. So Rainey will pull up the poll and you decide which one is false.
Five more seconds to get your last answers in. All right.
Okay. This one is going to surprise you. The first one was false. In the article, Bischoff says, quotes, that only when newspaper journalists picked up the drama of fierce storms, perilous rescues, or unusual careers was the life of the light keepers made a matter of permanent record. The men and women who kept the lights were, by and large, not drawn from a class that recorded their activities. Believe it or not, Mount Desert Rock had become well known for tourists and yachters, and in an 1885 guidebook called Mount Desert on the Coast of Maine, they say, the special claim of Southwest Harbor upon the tourist lies in the attractions of the sound in the ocean itself. The many islands lying within easy distance affords great variety of interest for yachting parties. This is the best point from which to undertake the trip to Mount Desert Rock. Throughout the summer, there is constant communication with the lightkeeper, and the trip can be easily arranged. And the third statement is very surprising, but it is, the following was made by the son of one of the lightkeepers. And he says, 3 times a year, the government boats brought food supplies, huge hams, slabs sides of bacon, canned mutton, salted horse, salted pork, kegs of sour pickles, barrels of dried apples, and hardtack. We ate well. When the sea was calm, fathers and sons caught lobsters. We caught pollock 3 feet long and lots of big codfish. They may have ate well for a couple of weeks or months, but that's a lot of food.
And let's just be grateful that at the baked bean supper, we're not eating salted horse.
Salted horse, yeah.
And there's our results.
Yeah.
Not very many people got that one right.
That one surprised me a lot.
Nice. All right.
And our final question is from Tim Garrity and his article, The Berwyn Mutiny.
Tim's a ringer in this one. He's watching.
Yeah,
so
he is.
To get this one right.
The first statement to consider is the largest ship ever built on MDI was the Berwyn at nearly 200 feet long, 38 feet wide, and displacing almost 1,000 tons. The second statement, in 1905, Edwin Rummel of Tremont, captain of the 4-masted schooner Berwyn, was killed in a mutiny at sea. Cold coffee was the final insult that led to the mutiny. And the third statement, after his release from prison, Arthur Adams, one of the Berwyn's wrongly accused mutineers, went on to work with an entertainment lawyer. So, Mark, your statement.
Tim, are you answering?
I got to get one of these right. I was sticking with answer number 3, no matter what.
All right, there's the end of our poll.
Okay. And number 1 was incorrect. The Berwyn was actually built in Millbridge, Maine. And according to Ralph Stanley's article, Shipbuilding on Mount Desert Island, the largest ship built on MDI, according to that article, was the 389-ton 3-master Joseph Wilde, built in 1873. So while the Berwyn was large, it was not built on MDI. And well, cold coffee was the final insult that led to the Berwyn's mutiny. The conflict that led to the killings was poor living conditions and withholding food and water. So that is true. And after his release from prison, Arthur Adams assisted his lawyer in the case, Joseph Bueller, and they went on to represent many show business personalities such as Greta Garbo, and to organize the entertainment industry to oppose Nazism and to support the welfare of American troops.
All right, that one tripped people up.
That was good. We got that one. So thank you very much for playing along, and please join us at Peter Trout's on March 22nd from 5:30 to 7:30. And again, bone up on your past Chabacos. We we'll start in March and we'll go every other month throughout the summer and the fall. So we look forward to seeing you. Get your membership, and I'll see you there.
Thank you, Lisa. I hope everybody had a little fun with the trivia and messing around. I'm curious to see if you have feedback on how you did, and whether we saw some in the chat, 3 out of 4. Oh wait, 4 out of 5. All right, that's good. So I'm now really pleased to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening, Steve Bromage, who is the director of the Maine Historical Society. We're so excited to have him with us tonight, where we're going to enjoy a conversation about the importance of history and the role that it plays in identity and community, and how our organizations are able to really be involved in this kind of work and what we do to be able to foster history and the relevancy of history. So Steve has been the director of the Maine Historical Society since 2012. but he's been an active leader in history and education, as well as community engagement since getting his master's degree in 20th century U.S. cultural history from Maine Amherst. The MDI Historical Society and the Maine Historical Society share many values, and Steve and I have had a really good time talking about the things that unite our organizations, including that we both believe that history is a vitally important resource to people in our communities, and that it plays a huge part in the lives of our everyday comings and goings. We believe in community and that history can help a community understand itself, both what it wants to be and aspires to be, and what it's always been. And we both love MDI. Steve's parents retired here. Some of you may know Ted and Joan Bromage. So he's got a special love here for MDI, just like the rest of us do. So Steve, I'm so excited to welcome you tonight, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Raney. It is a real pleasure to be here. And I do want to express my appreciation for the wonderful collaboration that Maine Historical Society has shared with MDI Historical Society for many, many years. We have had the good fortune to work closely with Tim Garrity and Bill Horner and with Raney and many, many volunteers there. There's been some great projects over the years. I think one of the really great rich ones was the digitization of the Champlain Society papers, which are online, which is just a great resource. I've also been, followed, as Raney said, MDI is near and dear to my heart, and you guys have just such a wonderful organization that is so open and innovative and creative. Followed the work that you've done with the History Trust, which I think is wonderful and innovative and important. So it's just nice to get to spend a little time with you. I wish I was with you in the high school. I did bring my can of B&M. I don't think I brought a can opener, but then again, I wasn't going to eat them cold anyway. So anyway, it's great to be you. I did also, before I get going, just did want to kind of recognize an important loss to our Maine history community, and that's Cinnamon Catlin Legutko, who passed away a week or so ago. I know she was a really important part of the island's history community. She was, I think, a great collaborator and inspiration for many of us who worked in the field. So I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to her. So with that, I just want to give you, share a little bit of overview of some of my perspectives on Maine history, some of the work we're doing, and just kind of little highlights there. But what I'm really looking forward to is the conversation with Raney and with all of you about what we all find important about, how history lives as part of kind of contemporary Maine today. So to start, I just sent around, I think I successfully shared a link in the crowd. I want to start by sharing what is, I think, my favorite and probably one of the best works of Maine history that I have seen or been part of in my 20 years working here in Maine. I'm not exaggerating remotely about that. So this exhibit that online exhibit that I want to talk a little bit and share, was created by an MDI high school student in 2006 through a partnership that MHS did with the MDI Historical Society. And I think it's relevant to our chat tonight for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, it's homegrown on MDI. And I think it grows out of the kind of collaborative work that I think is essential to everything, how I think about Maine history. And I think it to kind of key points that Raney and I want to emphasize in our conversation tonight. Second, I think it's really a perfect reflection of how central history is to our lives and our identities today, and to our communities, and to Maine's special sense of place, this kind of notion of how we all fit into the Maine story. I think really important to my concept is history isn't something out there. It's not about looking backwards, but it's really understanding who we are today and what we kind of love and cherish about Maine. All of that is really shaped by history. So here's the background. MHS launched Maine Memory Network in 2001. The same year that Maine launched this really innovative laptop program, which gave every middle school kid a laptop, which now seems obvious, but was not anything that happened. And it created this great sense of universal opportunity and participation, and that every kid's and community's educational experience was important. So it really equalized that distribution. So all of a sudden there were laptops in every middle school in Maine, and we had this project, the Maine Memory Network, that was designed to help communities share their stories, which I'll talk a little bit more. So somehow or another, so I spent my first decade or so at Maine Historical Society really developing Maine memory, traveling all around, working really closely with communities and seeing and observing and sitting down and talking about what stories mattered to them, what were the themes and collections and their expertise. And it's fascinating, really formative. But one of the things you could see is that every one of these historical society has such rich collections, wonderful materials, but oftentimes run by elderly volunteers without computers and resources. So quickly you could see, oh, there's this great opportunities to put the schools and historical societies together and to get the kids scanning the documents. And all of a sudden this material will become more accessible. So we had done this in some places and we had a grant and we had connected with the folks at MDI Historical Society. So then we put our heads together and we did this wonderful pilot in the fall of 2006 that set us in such a direction. But I worked with Mark Puglisi at the high school, and we developed a local history elective where the students spent about 3 months studying, learning MDI history. And I think there was maybe 14 or 15 kids in the class. And then they all went out and they all created online exhibits. They did research and they put these stories together, and they worked with, maybe some of you were involved. There were great community volunteers who mentored each of the kids. So one of the students, a young lady named Eliza War, created this online exhibit which explores the experience of her grandfather, Donald Bryant, working for the Rockefeller family. So now I'm going to see if I'm smart enough to share my screen. And again, I think you have that link now.
Yeah, I shared it back in the chat, so it should be the most recent piece in the chat.
Okay. And let me see. I have to go back. Apologize for my lack of sophistication here. I think you're going to see my notes when I pull this up, not what I'm trying to send you. What do you see there, Raney? Do you see the exhibit?
Nope. So far, I just see you. Oh, we're there we go. Exhibit and notes.
Yeah. Okay. That's not good. You don't want to
You want me to share it?
Sure. That'd be awesome.
I'll do that.
Okay. Yeah. So what I just want to highlight is, and what I really want to share here is how one person in Maine on MDI understood their relationship to the community and the world. So in this exhibit, I just wanted to read some highlights. So here's a high school student. And if you think about the complexity of relationships on the island and summer people and wealth and working family and the mutual dependency and the wonderful parts about that and the challenging parts of it, here's this high school kid who's writing, I'm just going to share a little bit. Mount Desert Island's summer residents have always played an important role in the character of the small coastal community. Many locals can attest to the fact that the island would be a very different place if not for the wealthy owners, originally called rusticators, and their seasonal visits. These differences could be seen in the island's economy, labor force, appearance, and even through the very livelihoods of those who live here year-round. Clearly, the more affluent residents of the island have had an impact on each of these aspects. This massive effect that MDI's summer people have had upon the area can be represented more clearly by focusing on one man's story. Donald Allison Bryant, a native of Mount Desert Island, spent most of 30 years working very closely with David Rockefeller and his family in the small village of Seal Harbor. So, Raney, if you just want to kind of scroll down and give a flavor, and then if you click into the exhibit, and then you can kind of click from slide to slide. But the remarkable thing that Eliza did back then was she told these two parallel stories. One about her family's history growing up in the vicinity of the island, going back many, many generations, and then of the Rockefeller family. And then she interweaves them together and she explores the opportunities that this relationship created for her family and the doors it opened, but also the hardship and the challenges and the expectations and the being away from home. I love these photographs from her family that she shared. You know, he looks like like JFK on the water or some such. So I was just blown away then, and I remain blown away to this day. And you can stop whenever you want, sharing, Raney, just about the sophistication that this high school kid had about Maine and this community and MDI's relationship to the world around it. I can't tell you enough about the impact that experience and hundreds really of other ones around the state have had in understanding what makes history and what makes history ticks. So she goes on, again, she explores the dynamics of the relationship, and I just found her wisdom and perspective really remarkable. And I'm guessing that most of you can just see in a heartbeat the complexity of the identity and the relationship and the opportunities. So I think that's really special. Okay, so let me just give you a little bit more background about Maine Historical Society, who we are and how we serve the state. So this is a really, excuse me, significant moment for MHS. In 2022, we marked our 200th birthday as an institution. Hurrah! Not many organizations have made it to 200, and I was really glad it didn't auger into the ground and go bankrupt at 199 or something. So we've made it to 200. And we've really spent that moment really focusing on preparing MHS for its third century of service to Maine, something that I'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit. So MHS was founded in 1822, just 2 years after Maine became a state, and has been collecting, preserving, and promoting research, scholarship, and engagement with Maine history really ever since. We're a private 501c3. Our mission is to preserve and share Maine's story. Bill Horner always calls me on that phraseology, and we can talk about that in a little while. We're based down here in Portland, but we work with communities and partners throughout the state on our exhibitions, Maine Memory, and other things. FYI, for perspective, we have a staff of about 22 FTEs. Our budget's about 1.6 million, and we support that by membership, an annual fund, earned income, endowment, a lot of hustle, foundation grants. We get like 2% of our budget from the state, so not very much, unfortunately. Our program areas include the Brown Research Library. We have a museum down here in Portland, and Maine Memory Network, which I will talk more about in a moment. I'll keep talking about. Our research library, the Brown Research Library, if you haven't been in, includes the most comprehensive collection of archival material related to Maine history in the state. Serves researchers, educators, students, genealogists, and the general public, and then really professionals from across many fields. It's a real gem. And as I say, we've been building those collections for 200 years. So there's a lot of rich, wonderful, diverse material there. Through the research library, we also support extensive scholarly and collections activities, including we publish the journal Maine History with the University of Maine's History Department. We're really proud of it, but I got to tell you, Shabako, I love it. I think it is one of the most excellent, beautiful publications. And for those of you who have been MHS members, you might remember that the journal Maine History was much more homely until a few years ago. And finally, we were able to redesign it and expand its format. And the example that you guys lead up there was no small part of the inspiration, because whenever I sat there, had cocktail hour at my parents, and I looked at it, I said, that is impressive. So you guys do an awesome job. We are really focused and committed on making our collections very accessible. When we take on collections, we want to make sure that we can get them in the hands of the public pretty quickly. We have undertaken a whole range of really comprehensive, exciting collections initiatives in the last couple of years. We have, most recently, we have about 3,000 historic clothing items. About 7 years ago, we developed an offsite collections management center with the Portland Public Library, about 18,000 square feet of climate humidity control that gave us finally space to unpack things. And I know that's been storage has been a conversation with the History Trust and otherwise, and that collaborative model for us has been really powerful. But anyway, finally, if you picture the worst elements of your closet, all your clothing jammed together on hangers, that's what our clothing collection was like. So with this facility, we could get a big grant from IMLS, move them out there, hire pros at curating, and completely unpack, fully digitize, and prepare it. And that 5-year project culminated in the big clothing exhibit we did last year, which was great. So getting the collections out there is really important. We also, one of our important collections is the proprietors' records, which really document the distribution of land in Maine from the 1600s to the 1800s. It's really one of the most important. It's got maps, Indian native trait treaties, all kinds of rich stuff. Anyway, we've just completely finished completely digitizing that. That's on Maine Memory Network. So it goes on, but getting the collections out there is really important. Our museum down here offers changing exhibitions and public programs that seek to provide context for issues of contemporary interest concern. That's a really important facet that we'll talk about. Our museum also includes the Wadsworth Longfellow House, and for a long time, that's a lot of what the public meant to us. As we were talking about before the program started, the pandemic was fantastic for one thing, which was this universal adoption of Zoom, which all of a sudden allows people throughout the state and across the country to participate in our public programs, much like you all have done at MDI Historical Society. It's amazing to be able to be connected this way, regardless of geography. And I want to, and then to go back, and I mentioned the Maine Memory Network, but that's a really significant game changer for MHS. For our first 180 years, unless you lived in Southern Maine and were inclined to work into a research library, we might not have been able to serve you. But Maine Memory has really changed that. It's still one of the most innovative online history platforms in the country. So it's built on the principle that every community's history and all Maine's people's experience are really critical to our shared understanding of Maine. Maine Memory provides infrastructure, training, and support that empowers communities to share their collections and knowledge and expertise and stories. It's evolved constantly over the past 20 years and now offers access to material contributed by 285 organizations around Maine. It's truly phenomenal, that kind of sweep. It's got hundreds of online exhibits, websites built by community teams, including one that you all created, educational resources, and really much, much more. It also, again, provides deep collection to our own collections. At this point, it's become a gateway, a jumping off point, and shared space where people can really explore their experiences, part of broader narratives of Maine and U.S. history. So that's a really important part. And the amazing thing Raney and I were talking about last week is just like this collapsing of geographic and institutional boundaries. There are wonderful collections all around, but the ability to go in and do a search and look for the Civil War, shipbuilding, or community parades, whatever your topic of interest might be, and see material from spread across multiple organizations all around the state, you get to really begin to see the connections, the commonality of the experiences, but also the things that distinguish the Potato Blossom Parade in Aroostook County from the Elephant and Circus Parade in Biddeford, or whatever the case might be. So the ability for us all to kind of come together and collaborate and to zoom in and zoom out on Maine, I think, has been really important. And that experimentation through the work with all of our close partners and friends around the state, I think has been really fundamental to how we approach our work. So to continue to talk about that theme of relevancy that I think is so important to what we want to talk about tonight, so to me, the Maine Memory experience was eye-opening, because you'd go in, just how we all think about what people's hangups about history are, what their appreciations. And one of the things we found with Maine Memory is you go around and you watch people approach that search box and what they plug in, and you find out, we all know a lot of people had a bad history teacher in sophomore year in high school, and they resent it and they've never recovered from it. But what I think we all need to think about is the way history creeps up, and it's much more fundamental to who you are and who we are than many people think. So with Maine Memory, you see people go in and they're not searching, teach me about history, teach me a lesson. They're going to look for themselves. So that search box of entering their town or their favorite hobby. We would be working with students, and you see these, teens, 7th grade, I dare you to engage me. But then they start typing in fishing, and they're bringing up these incredible photographs and records. And all of a sudden they're seeing themselves, look at that funny reel, look at that funny thing, look at how many fish they caught. And so it's pretty remarkable in how people think about different histories. So I think one of the kind of, Raney, for our conversations, one of the keys is how people participate and are reflected and are really key to the story of Maine history, MDI history, et cetera. So I think that's a key thing for us to come back. So with that experience of Maine memory, I had the pleasure of running around Maine, working with communities again and again. Then when I took over here, the question really became, how do you start to build those principles at a much more fundamental level into the work of the organization? And so it got to be about relevancy and really beginning to think that Maine history is less about looking back and thinking about how it was then than thinking about today and in the profound ways that history shapes this place that we care about so much. So with that, in recent years, we've really focused on trying to build a much more modern organization that can nimbly respond to the ever-changing community needs. For those of us who work in the field, it used to be that a curator could just hang out with the collections for decades and know a lot about them, and every now and then they'd come out and tell you what you needed to know. The opportunity and the challenge is really to build a staff and a team who's not just thinking about what we have, but looking out into the community and thinking about, what's going on out there and what resources do we need to have to provide context or information. So a primary emphasis that we've had has been on developing programming and content that explores how history shapes Maine today and that focus on the needs, interests, and passions of contemporary Mainers. So recent exhibit program ignitions have looked at and provided information, context, and perspective on topics like immigration, changes in the paper industry, Maine's food economy and culture. Our major bicentennial exhibit, Holding Up the Sky, Wabanaki People, Culture, History, and Art, explored 13,000 years of Wabanaki presence and stewardship of Maine. In 2021, our exhibition, Begin Again, Reckoning with Intolerance in Maine, explored how Maine fits into that national dialogue onto race and equity. You know, there's a big national attention, but a lot of people asking, where does Maine fit into this story? So our exhibition really tried to look back and go deep and provide some context for that. Our exhibit this coming year was going to focus on Maine's environment and climate change. Nothing to that story of climate change and how it's going to affect Maine and our sense of place and what it looks like and to feel here. I think it was 2016 or 17, we did our annual meeting, Maine Historical did, on MDI, and we had it at the Abbey Museum. We did some programs with you all. But David McDonald, I think is his name, the former head of Friends of Agata, gave this talk, and he talked about, I don't want to say the canary in the coal mine, what the right phrase is, but he talked, is it Bunker Ledge or one of these critical places that that we all go to and look at for the seals and as a landmark as we head out to the islands. But then imagining, when with global warming and if the seas changes X percentage, where that will just be completely underwater and not emerge. And so really powerful way in helping me, that MDI experience and perspective in seeing the immediacy of what's at risk with climate change. So anyway, excuse me. So as I mentioned, so that's a little background on some of our approach to relevancy. As I mentioned, we've marked our bicentennial by focusing on preparing MHS for its third century of Maine. The board, our staff, stakeholders spent the past year doing a new a 5-year business plan to look at really how we're going to build capacity. So we've outlined paths and initiatives that are going to guide us. And our goal is really to transform MHS from what we consider a small and mighty organization that consistently fights above our weight to the one that has really the capacity and resources to inspire and be a source of connection and perspective for all people who care about Maine. And I think maybe, I'll just give you a little bit more about that, and then maybe it's a good time to transition to our conversation, Raney. And I think, one of the things, and you all can appreciate because you do a lot with a really small team, and I feel, that's like the defining characteristic of MHS. We've got these incredible people, and they're producing so much work, but do we ever quite get to the impact or the reach that we should because of resources? So, through Maine Memory Network, we probably had between $6 and $7 million in federal grants over a 12 or so year period that let us go out and experiment. How do you mobilize communities? How do you support? How do you bring schools, libraries, and historical societies together around their history? So our real focus and goal is really building resources so that we cannot, Raney and I cannot just have a great inspired conversations about collaboration, but where we've got the team in place to support greater collaboration and participation. I think some of the really powerful thing in those exhibit initiatives I mentioned was the ability to really turn over our galleries and work collaboratively with community teams on the development of the exhibitions. That's really been a game changer. So what we're really looking to do is try to build our resources to work more closely with partners around the state. And I guess the last thing I would say is there's so much incredible knowledge and expertise around the state, and that's in the case of history, but there's so many things to go. You take the environmental topic, for example. There's so much expertise and leadership. I think one of the things that MHS can provide is a broad statewide platform. I think the love that people have for Maine and for MDI and for all our local places is really one of our greatest assets. And it's a really powerful source of connection. So I think the ability to see how we all fit into this big Maine story, and to really see that we have agency. Raney and I talked about this a little bit on last week, and I hope we'll talk about it a little bit more, because I think a big part of the work of history is seeing and inspiring people to understand that what they do matters, and their agency matters. And you might work on the third shift in a paper mill. You could be a governor, you could be a summer person from away, but you really, if you can't understand Maine if you factor out one of our regions, one of our industries, summer people, working people, the wealthy summer people. It's all part of what makes Maine Maine, and our emphasis. So I think really exploring that collaboratively with people who love Maine and people across the strait is a really important part of it. I realize I talk 100 miles a minute. I apologize for that. Raney, I hope I gave the right, kind of broad sweeping comments, and I'll turn it over to you to guide us from here.
No, that's great. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. And it's really sparked a very interesting conversation going on in the chat that I'll just sort of try to fold into rather than going straight to our questions. I'll want to
thank you, because I cannot walk and chew gum. So I saw stuff happening, but I have no idea what it was.
Yeah, no, there's a great conversation going on in the chat about how we capture contemporary stories and situations, because so much is shared on social media now. And rather than we all can look to historic archival material and look at those letters that were sent back and forth that share stories and observations and jokes and whatever. But how are we doing that now when people aren't writing physical letters? Are we cataloging emails? Are we capturing social media? So for Molly and Julia and a few other people that are engaging in this conversation on the chat, I would welcome you to, if you want to unmute and say something about it and share the resources. But even beyond them, any of you who are participating in online social media, email conversations, how should we, what do we preserve and how do we preserve it for future generations? It's a real challenge that I think all of our organizations struggle with, and I'd be curious to hear what people think about it. And if Julia and Molly aren't going to speak up, then anyway, obviously anyone can anyway, but Steve, you can respond to it while they maybe unmute.
Sure. Well, I think.
Yeah, Jenna.
Sorry, I just wanted to share an example of an electronic communication that was somehow shared and added to our collection. That on April Fool's Day, we shared the email about the Soamesville Bridge and its weight capacity, and how it was tested by its builders and its weight capacity by having a group of high school students jump up and down on it, I believe, to test its capacity. And so it was in an email that was scanned and then given to us in our collection. And so it's an example of something that was originally digital that was made physical so that we could then make it into digital again and share it with our communities. So it's I put in the chat Print more photos. I always tell everyone, print more photos, because we're going to get to a place where we really wish we had the physical. And I thought, gosh, those poor folks in the future that are going to be digitizing all those photos, I told everyone to print, because we're trying to make all print things digital now. And so maybe my advice isn't that great. It is a really complex topic.
Yeah, and
thank you, Steve, by the way, for your great talk on all of that.
Yeah, no, it was interesting for me because I've been to conference sessions and had conversations with folks about how are we capturing, especially, for example, ephemeral memorial responses to major events in our community. And there's I'm at the Wilson Museum in Castine, and shortly before the Christmas holidays, there was a really horrible crash that killed 4 Maine Maritime Academy students and seriously injured 3 more. And so much of the community response was in social media, and it wasn't getting documented anywhere else. I mean, there were news stories and so on, but the really intense, like, emotional responses to it that were so I think important to document that were happening on social media. And so I reached out to the Casting Historical Society because, there's 2 of us in a town of less than 1,000. So we're working together on it. And we spent some time just going through the social media channels that we knew were being active and just screenshotting, capturing some screenshots. And they're sitting on my desktop, and we captured those. But we don't have a plan yet for, like, now what do we do with them? But it's like this like emergency response history. Like, how do we do that so that we're not losing those incredibly impactful and powerful, cultural community responses to major things happening in the community?
I think the whole notion of collections and what survives is so serendipitous anyway, and it's constantly evolving and changing. Every day you hear about, they cleaned out this attic and this got saved and that disappeared, and I think, I think a theme we didn't hit, but is the world around us is changing constantly and evolving constantly. And I think that's a really important theme in Maine as we understand where we are today and heritage industries turnover. So I think one of the really important tools and resources history gives us is like this body of experience that we look at. And again, Raney and I talked about this the other day. You drive around the state of Maine, and you see that every community thrived. It had its moment and it had its time. And that was because someone at some point saw an opportunity. They understood that there was a strategic opportunity. They understood a market, and they invested and they built a business. And it might be because they had a natural resource or a power source. And for some period of time, that business and that community and that economy thrived. But then the international economy is always changing and moving around. And so to me, when I look at those stories, it gives us the gift of foresight. And we know where we are today. The economy is going to change. The opportunities are going to change. So the more we as Mainers are talking about what we cherish about Maine, what's important to our sense of place, what's important that's here 20 or 30 years from now, but then what are our opportunities? We know we have to have economies that provide jobs and opportunities for people to raise families and tax revenues to take care of our issues. So a rambling answer, but the world around us is evolving, and as it evolves, so is what we collect. I look at, how we're horrified by the amount of time our kids are staring into their phones. And then I'm reminded as a child of the 70s, how everybody thought the world was over because the TV was on. Not in my house, but the TV was on all the time. So novels come and go. All of these forms of expression come and go. And, we have to keep adapting and imagining what's going to be important to capture. So Julia, to your point about this is important moment, let's print and capture. It might be imperfect, but it's going to get it. I think that's all we can do. It's funny, at this 200th birthday, we're looking at, what is 100 years from now, what are the materials, what are the collections that are going to have to be built and gathered and invested in to have a good record of the time. So I think it's going to be a constant evolving conversation about how we capture now and going forward, digitally and otherwise.
That brings me to an interesting question that we did talk about, Steve, that I'd be curious to hear what other people think too. And that is that both of our organizations are dedicated to fostering understanding and engagement about histories that extend beyond a specific town or a specific subject. We are both geographically focused. You, the state of Maine, us, the island of Mount Desert. And so engaging with community is a different kind of challenge for us, because we don't just have a town that we are working with. We're working with broader geographic differences. So how do you sort of take your museum outside of the walls and the physical limitations that Portland presents to be able to engage and represent larger geographic areas? And then from the audience, what ideas do you have about how you would want to be involved in sharing history and documenting history? And like, what kinds of things do you want to see preserved and shared now or with future generations?
Yeah, it's funny, Raney, because I feel like my position where I sit is the greatest gift in the world, because I'm more of a champion and lover of Maine and history even. And I just feel so fortunate that what our geographic scope is the state of Maine. And I think that special sense of place, that Maine is just such a remarkable place. And so I feel like we've got the perfect geography in a sense, and it lets us engage and think about and look at how all the different places from Sanford to Eastport, kind of fit into there. So I think that geography from a mission perspective is a wonderful thing. Now, the practicality, I think, we're in such a liberated moment. I think 20 years ago, people would think about, I'm collecting it. These are our, people were much more focused on building their own collections. And, it was mutually exclusive. It was less collaborative. Whereas now, I don't think, at any level, we are grateful for all the things we don't collect and that other people do. So I think,
Yes.
To me, it begins with a belief that everybody's story matters in their experience. And what's your experience in Maine? Oh, you were a summer, you came to camp, you worked in, I think that is fascinating and has value and helps us inform what we know about Maine, so needs to be preserved. I think most of the rich stuff exists in families, in attics and such. So I think as stewards, where we sit and where you sit, Raney, I think the most important thing is that our people in our communities recognize and appreciate that, hey, they're part of this main story in a really dynamic way, and that the material they have and where their family story fits and contributes is really critical. So to me, the kind of goal is wanting to promote and support the preservation engagement with Maine history wherever and however sits. And to me, it is so much more powerful if you think about hundreds of local collections and then thousands of family collections, if we can conceptually and programmatically find ways for all of that to come together. So Maine Memory Network has a section called My Maine Stories, and you can go there, and we work with people in different industries, and you can go on there and you can record a couple-minute video, you can upload photographs and go with it. So as we look at how we build out our infrastructure, the next generation of Maine memory, and then what we develop for a museum down here, I think it's all about, I think what we can provide is a jumping off point and a place of discovery to go out and learn. So I think our opportunity, our responsibility is to provide a wonderful museum in Portland, a wonderful statewide digital platform where people who are interested in Maine go and they start exploring and looking, and then they discover and they go deep, So I just think there's a really wonderful power in the zooming in and out between the different places.
Mm-hmm. Bill, sorry, Bill had his hand raised, and then Jenna.
Yeah, great to see you, Steve, and I really enjoyed your remarks. I wonder if it's possible to have a regional or statewide strategic conversation. At our own historical society right now, we're involved in a strategic planning that's probably going to take us several years to come about. It's a very detailed process, but it's one that opens up the organization. We get to listen to our stakeholders and so on and so forth. But it just seems to me that in a state like Maine, you have all these little wonderful communities who have all this fantastic history, who are trying their level best on a voluntary basis for the most part to, first of all, help people to understand that they are stewards, actually, not necessarily owners, at least for the informational contact, and that this has to be preserved in some form. But it reminds me of what I used to do as a trauma surgeon, in the sense that, you know, having worked at Maine Medical Center, Eastern Maine Medical Center, you have these sort of focal areas which are kind of like the tertiary care centers. And so I would sort of equate Maine Historical Society as the sort of big center of Maine. But yet you have all of these peripheral entities out there. And yes, you've done a phenomenal job with promoting Maine Memory Network. It provides a vehicle, but there are so many ways that if we work together, we could figure out, for example, funding. You know, we've had a great local regional effort here over the last several years on putting this history trust together. That's been done on a shoestring budget.
Yeah.
And, you know, primarily because you have talented people who look at it as a labor of love and are willing to do the work for nothing. And yet we've arrived at a point where do we go from here? You know, is there some next step up where we can maintain some element of the local autonomy? Because I'm convinced that all our stories are different. The question is how you integrate them. That our perhaps attitudes towards history are quite different from one place to another. And somehow we have to kind of come to some kind of agreement strategically, if you will. So I'm just wondering, you know, try to take it up another level as to what the potential would be for having the kind of broader regional strategic conversations that we had when we were putting the trauma center, for example, down at Maine Medical Center together with the helicopters and all that stuff. So anyway, I just put that out there as a question.
Bill, I think it's a fantastic point. And the other frame of reference on this call that I'm going to point out is Molly Cashwell and the work she's doing with the Cultural Alliance of Maine. So I think, you know, to start, to me, so much of it's about capacity, right? You know, the capacity to do this. And I have to laugh. 20 years at Maine Historical, 10 years as director, I finally kind of feel like this past year, we're finally becoming the organization that begins to be able to execute on these visions I've had, for example. So a big part of that business plan, again, for us is having the capacity to do this work on Engage, because so much is on a shoestring that, you know, even Bill, as we've tried to have conversations over the years, you know, it's a passing thing, and there's not, I need to have a team. We all need to have the teams to follow up and take it and run with it. So one of the things that Molly is doing with the Cultural Alliance of Maine is looking at how do we advocate better in Augusta? How is there more resources brought to the cultural community in Maine? So I think there's a wonderful opportunity before us to engage in that conversation that you're suggesting. And I think ultimately that needs to lead to advocating. I mean, it's a pittance what the state of Maine puts into its cultural infrastructure and its institutions. But I think we need to have a compelling plan and a strategy, something to take it to fight for the money, to fight for the resources. And if we can talk about, here's how it is on a global scale and how the pieces fit, and here's what needs to happen locally and regionally to support that effort, whether it's staff and infrastructure or grants and funding. Because I think, Bill, you know, again, I so admire your innovation and leadership there. And the key is getting a critical mass of people together to have that conversation who can follow through with it and go fight for the resources, I think.
The Duns have their hand raised.
Yes, I was just saying the Duns. Yep, Jeff and Linda, hi.
Hi, how are you? This is great, but Raney, I have a question for you based on something you suggested a while ago, and that was the fact that the historic record is being hurt because things are not recorded in writing like they used to. And it's more social media and things like that. So my first question, is there anyone using historic media to develop a sophisticated historic record? And the second part of that, which I hate to say, is should we be happy that people like Trump get back on Twitter so we can document his history?
I'm going to refrain from the second comment, but when you say traditional media to develop an archive, do you mean are people writing things down?
No, not that they're not writing it, but are people using that as a formal source as they write the modern history?
Social media.
Yeah, I guess Steve, do you? I'm not sure I totally understand the question about, I mean, we have people who are, oh, do you want to clarify, sir?
So are you the question of people using traditional historical, the collections that we all have to do their research, and
That's
or
true, yeah.
are they using are they finding a way to use the Trumpian tweet record, for example, the more modern ones that we're concerned that we're not preserving?
Well, yes. Is there anyone who's formally using the social media record that's out there to codify our modern history for the future?
That's a good question.
I did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Chabaco, 2023, in the local establishment of the Coast Guard near MDI, I very frequently at the end reference Southwest Harbor Coast Guard's public Facebook posts and what they're up to in the local community. And so that's blending records from 1870 with records from 2023. And it's pretty difficult to cite them correctly. The citation is so obnoxiously long. Our designer will probably be angry with me. But yeah, formally historians do use social media posts, whether that's good or bad. It does happen.
And I would just add, I'm not expert on it, but I know at the professional conferences in the library, in the archiving field, in the history field, that what do we do and how are we preserving that record question is something that smart minds are behind. Again, I don't have the answers, but I know people are grappling with the question of how do we preserve this record of our time.
Bill, I'm going to toss to you, and then we may continue this conversation, but Bill may have something to add to it. Or a different question.
Me?
Yes.
I'm a Bill. Okay. So
oh yes, not Bill Horner, Bill Scopel.
Yeah, so there's something, there's the Wayback Machine, and that in the sort of website area has recorded a lot of things. And my wife, researching American politics, has made a lot of good use of that, finding things about the last 20 years of the history of things. I have one question, Steve, which is, is the Maine Museum in Augusta, is that another statewide focused thing? How does that relate to the state?
Sure, that's a good question. So it is a state agency, and it is a museum, and its collections are heavy on objects, artifacts, as opposed to archives and records in a quick and dirty. They've been out of the state cultural building for 2 years now, because of dealing with asbestos. So they've been shut down, but they are been much more focused on attendance at the building there and the kind of core exhibitions. I think Molly and I were at a presentation last week, and I think they're hoping to reopen late 2024, 2025. But they've been more static, the display of a museum in Augusta, and changing exhibits too. So they're working to come back, but objects are their strength, I would say. And anthropology in addition to history.
We had skipped over Jenna, and then Tim had his hand up, but because we skipped over Jenna, I had said Bill, and she didn't raise her hand. So we want to go back there.
Tim, no, it's okay. Tim, you can go. Go, Tim.
Steve, I want to ask you about your strategic planning process and Raney too. it's the general question. Do you think that in the future you're working in a environment that's favorable to your mission, or one where you're swimming against the tide? And the reason I ask is I just had a conversation with some professors at University of Maine, and they feel that they're in kind of a negative environment for the humanities in general. And I just wonder, from your perspective, Steve, at your level, and Raney at yours, do you think that the situation is a little different in public history than it is in academic history, where the history department is really struggling and facing cutbacks in staffing, and vacant positions aren't getting filled, and also students are at least the graduate level are turning away from history because they feel the need to get a job and pay off student loans and so forth. It's just a negative economic situation. So I just wonder, from a strategic standpoint, are you looking at something in the future where you expect the environment is favorable for public history or unfavorable?
A big theme in my career and my focus is, hey, the world's changing around us, and it's our responsibility. We have to evolve, and our business model has to evolve to be relevant, and that's not a cynical, oh no. To me, the reason why our business plan is focused on in transforming our audiences, because I believe deeply in the value of what we're doing. So I think I don't think whatever the trend is really the determinative factor. I think we have the opportunity to reinvent and reimagine how people think about and engage history. A lot of the things we're talking about today. And I think when they understand that this is my place that I care about, where my family, we've had experiences for generations, or this new place I'm part of, I think it's all on us to be creative and resourceful and entrepreneurial in terms of how we present our program and our resources to the community. So I think it's on our shoulders, and I don't buy that, the world's changing us around us, so there's not an opportunity. I think there's an incredible opportunity, but it's on us, like any business, like any organization, to understand the world changing around us and how we relate to that, and what it is that we have to contribute. That's what it comes down to. What is it that we have to contribute to the life of our community? And I think there's huge opportunity there.
I'm actually really excited. This is maybe a negative thing to be excited about, but I do think that the decline in academic history, starting with K through 12, where we just are not teaching it in primary schools or in high school sufficiently, we see that going up into pursuits for education at a higher level. I think that encumbers an opportunity and a sense of responsibility on the public historians to be able to engage with people and teach in a way that's exciting and dynamic and relevant, that is not that people don't have access to in school anymore. And I would say that I'm super hopeful, because I can't even think of a conversation that I've had that's like a meaningful conversation about MDI where someone doesn't say, it used to, or I used to, or when it was. Like, everybody here is referencing the past, whether it's about cruise ships or housing or climate change or community or collective memory or whatever. There is always a grounding or a foundation in that conversation in history. And so MDI Historical's opportunity is to provide context and rich conversation and opportunity for engagement around those histories, so that, as Steve said, everyone sees themselves in that. And in that way, we will always be relevant, and we will always be community driven, and we will always be, I think, a fundamental part of this space. I hope.
So I was going to ask, you have a pretty big task being the Maine Historical Society, the maps behind you. But I would like to point out that while I can see a little bit of brick on the bottom, I can't actually see where I'm tuning in from this evening, which is at the tippy top of Maine. So you have a lot of different there it is. Hey, I'm in St. Francis right now. So, and I'm a St. John Valley born and raised woman. So you have a lot of different regional identities within Maine, and its really strong sense of place. So how do you at the Maine Historical Society like create community among all of those regional identities? Because we all feel like Mainers and we all are Mainers, but we're really unique from north to south and coast to west.
Yeah, I think it's with a sense and a spirit of incredible enthusiasm and appreciation, and how fortunate, because again, some people might not know about the St. John Valley, and I think till 10 years ago, a lot of the public didn't know that we had tribes in Maine, so I think it's an awesome opportunity, responsibility to celebrate all the different flavors and parts and aspects of Maine. That's spectacular. So I think we can help do that by being a conduit where people who care about Maine see our digital resources, our resources, and we are highlighting stories, collections, partners, stories. So I think for us, we see it's twofold. Ultimately, we're looking to replace our awful aging museum building in Portland. And the vision is not there to create the Taj Mahal to Maine Historical Society, but it's a place to create a place that highlights and celebrate partners and stories and communities around the state. So when we do that, it's a place where our partner in the St. John Valley shares and has a key artifact shown and highlighted. And when people come to our museum, they're saying, oh my God, I had no idea. And they're learning about the stories of Maine through a broad process that features partners and stories, and leaves them saying, I had no idea. I want to go there. I want to learn more in that. So I think we've got to be wide open in our vision and our commitment to doing that. And, that's what we're working on now. How can we do that effectively? What resources do we need? And what does it look like? To Bill's question, how does it all fit together? Hope that helps.
We have about 5 minutes left. Tim, is your hand still up or is it up again? Nope. Okay. Rick.
Sorry, I was on mute.
That's all right.
Steve, I'm involved with the MDI Historical Society, but I'm wondering, has there ever been an effort amongst the various historical societies or organizations to do in some sort of organized fashion a survey of what people think are the most important things that have happened in the past year, both locally as well as in the state of Maine? Just list 5 things. And then if let's say you were the focal point, you could compare and contrast and say, everybody's talking about the fishing industry on the coast. Everybody's up in the Western talking about something else. But just so that people get a sense of it, and I think it might be a way to build bonds between different organizations.
I think that's a really important thing. I was having a conversation with my management team this morning just about that kind of thing, about how you help identify, surface, and frame the conversation about what's important to Maine in a given period of time. And we were talking about how you really have a process where the team is getting together on a regular basis and say, what am I seeing? What am I going? What do we offer? But I think that kind of dialogue, as we think about our public programs and the themes and the topics we take on, I mentioned the different topics we've hit in previous time. I think there's great opportunity to do that in a more communal way and a collective way. And I think, again, to Bill's point and what the Cultural Alliance of Maine is doing, I think the key is to create some kinds of structure and mechanisms that have legs. You see, Raney, like Maine Archives and Museums, for example, there are all kinds of professional organizations that have a purview to take on these kinds of things. But there's oftentimes a period of great richness for 5 or 6 years where a group of young rising professionals are taking it by the tail and making things happen, but then it doesn't have the resources and capacity to continue. So I think visioning a statewide cultural infrastructure that's fostering civic dialogue and has the opportunity to bring people in. So if it's heritage industry or aquaculture, finding a way to do it, have that conversation at a statewide level. I'm not sure if I really answered it, but I like your idea of surveying to take the pulse of people to see what's important to them.
Yeah, I think
my simple thought was, you know, if we each did a survey at the beginning of each year and just asked people, what do you think are the most 5 important issues locally, and what are the 5 most important issues in your mind from a statewide point of view, and then and it gets people thinking, and it also makes us more relevant because we're capturing history.
Well, that's the piece that I always like. It comes back to that contemporary piece, is like, what is our ability to care for something in perpetuity too? So it's like, we have to be careful that we're not overpromising. As Steve just mentioned, you can sometimes get an enthusiastic group of people who start to foster a certain project, and then if it drops off, like, what's the responsibility that we have and the duty of care that we have to be able to say that we're going to take care of something for the long term? I think it's one thing to have listening sessions and to be getting input. It's another thing to say that we are going to take that and collect on it, based on it. Like, that's a different set of responsibilities for an organization, and we should be doing it, but we have to be really thoughtful and careful about how we do it, because it also represents an ongoing responsibility. All right. So on that note, any last questions or thoughts or comments? I think it's been a really robust discussion. Steve, we didn't get through any of the questions that we had prepared, just in case no one asked anything. So I'm excited to see there was another like whole thread of conversations in the chat, which I hope people had a chance to look at, related to community engagement and history and archives, and being able to share different things related to a sense of place and cultural heritage. And so it's really exciting to see all these different organizations engaging in this, and different ideas for how we do it. Thank you, Steve, so much for joining us tonight for our virtual Bean Supper. I hope that you and Joan will be able to be here in person with us, fingers crossed, next year. And I am really grateful for all of you for staying with us this evening and having a nice conversation about the importance of history and dinner. And I hope you enjoyed our quiz. Thank you, Lisa, for putting that together. And this has been recorded, and it will be available through our website within the next couple of weeks. So make sure you check that out. And if you'd like to make a donation to the Historical Society so we can continue to do these programs, we're deeply grateful for your support. And anything you always give is appreciated at any time. So on that note, thank you all so much. Have a great Monday evening, and stay warm this week. Take care.
Thank you, everybody, so much. Greatly appreciate the chance.